I found the attorney's business card in my wife's winter coat the night she asked me to carry it to the dry cleaner. The appointment date on the back was 6 weeks before our wedding. The note in her handwriting said, "Confirm vesting 18 months post-ceremony." I'm Thomas Hale, 43, a contractor in Knoxville. I say that plainly because there's nothing glamorous about this story, no dramatic mansion, no offshore accounts, no villain who looks like a villain. Just a woman I loved completely, a coat I carried to the dry cleaner on a Tuesday, and a card that rewrote every memory I had of the previous 3 years. My mother introduced me to Carrie. That's the part that matters most before anything else does. My mother Ruth had a gift for people. She could read a room in 30 seconds, and she'd read Carrie as the one before I'd finished being nervous on our first date. She loved Carrie with the specific enthusiasm of a woman who'd watched her son be careful and guarded for years and was relieved to finally see him let someone in. When we got engaged, my mother cried. Not politely, the real kind. She died 14 months into our marriage. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and merciless. Carrie sat beside her hospital bed for 3 nights straight during the final week, holding her hand, telling her stories about our future, the house we were going to renovate, the kids we talked about, the garden Ruth had always wanted to see finished. My mother died, believing her son had married the right woman. I think about that now. I think about it more than I think about the money. I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday night holding the card for a long time. 18 months post-ceremony. I pulled out my phone and counted backward from the date we'd signed the post-nuptial agreement, the one Carrie had suggested for both our protection 11 months into the marriage. The one that granted her a 40% stake in the business I'd built before we met if we were still married at the 3-year mark, a clause I'd agreed to because I was grieving my mother, and Carrie had framed it as security for our future. The 3-year mark was 4 months away. I didn't call anyone that night. I put the coat in the car, drove to the dry cleaner in the morning, and came home and sat with what I knew the way I sit with a structural problem on a job site quietly, from every angle, until I understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I touch anything. What I was dealing with, Carrie had consulted a divorce attorney before our wedding to map out the exact legal conditions under which she could exit the marriage with the maximum financial return. She'd suggested the postnuptial agreement herself, used my grief as the window to get me to sign it, and was 4 months away from the vesting date she'd calculated before she'd ever walked down the aisle. I called my business attorney, a man named Frank Aller, who'd handled my contracts for 8 years, and told him I needed to understand the postnuptial agreement in detail, specifically whether there were any conditions under which it could be contested. Frank asked me why. I told him what I'd found. There was a long pause. "Come in tomorrow morning," he said, "and bring the card." Frank found 2 things. First, the attorney whose name was on the card, a woman named Patricia Geis, specialized exclusively in high-asset divorce strategy, not family law broadly, not mediation, not custody. Specifically, how to structure a marriage exit for maximum financial recovery. Her client intake process, Frank knew from professional circles, included a full asset mapping session before the marriage even began. Carrie hadn't stumbled across Patricia Geis. She'd sought out the specific attorney who helps people treat marriage as an investment vehicle. Second, and this is what changed everything, the postnuptial agreement Carrie had suggested contained a clause that made it voidable if either party could demonstrate it was signed under conditions of emotional duress. My mother had died 6 weeks before Carrie brought the agreement to me. I'd been back at work for 4 days. I'd signed it at our kitchen table on a Sunday evening while Carrie made tea and told me it was just paperwork. Emotional duress has a legal definition. Frank said we met it. I didn't confront Carrie yet. I did something she'd taught me by example. I planned first. I contacted Patricia Geis's office under a different name, requesting a consultation about a high-asset divorce situation. Patricia's intake coordinator sent me a standard questionnaire, the kind designed to map out what a client was worth before the first meeting. The questions were specific, clinical, and in a particular order. I recognized the same order Carrie's questions had followed in the early months of our relationship, when I'd thought she was just interested in my work. I didn't complete the questionnaire. I had what I needed. I also called Carrie's closest friend, a woman named Dana, who'd been her maid of honor and who I'd always genuinely liked. I didn't tell Dana everything. I told her I'd found something that concerned me about a financial decision Carrie had made before our wedding and that I was trying to understand it. Dana went quiet in a way that told me the silence wasn't surprise. I asked her directly, did she know? She told me it was just being smart, Dana said finally. She said every woman should know her exit before she goes in. Did she tell you whose money she was being smart with? Dana didn't answer, but she called Carrie within the hour, which I'd expected, because I needed Carrie to know something had shifted without knowing exactly what I had. So she'd make a move before I showed my hand. Carrie came home that evening with the specific, careful energy of someone recalibrating, and over dinner she suggested, gently, that maybe we should revisit the postnuptial agreement since her financial situation had changed. She was trying to renegotiate before I could challenge, which meant she knew the original terms were vulnerable. I told her that sounded reasonable and that I'd have Frank look it over. Frank filed the formal challenge to the postnuptial agreement the following Monday on grounds of emotional duress, with a supporting affidavit from my mother's oncologist confirming the timeline of her death relative to the signing date, and a separate filing requesting Patricia Geis's client intake records for the period covering 6 weeks before our wedding, which, in a civil discovery context related to a marital fraud claim, were not fully protected by attorney-client privilege since they documented pre-marital financial planning that formed the basis of the agreement itself. Carrie's attorney a different one, not Patricia, which told me she'd already been in contact with legal counsel before Frank filed anything moved to block discovery. The motion was denied. Patricia Geis's intake questionnaire for Carrie's pre-wedding consultation was entered into the record. The asset mapping she'd done before our ceremony. The specific vesting timeline she'd built around my business ownership. The notes recommending the postnuptial framing as the cleanest extraction mechanism, all of it. Now part of a court record with both their names on it. The postnuptial agreement was voided 4 months before the vesting date it had been designed around. Carrie received the standard marital asset split applicable to a 3-year marriage with a prenuptial waiver which, without the agreement, meant she left with significantly less than she'd planned, and none of the business stake she'd spent 3 years positioning herself for. Patricia Geis's intake records, now discoverable, were flagged by the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility for a separate review into whether her premarital asset mapping consultations constituted facilitation of marital fraud, a question her bar association is still examining. Dana called me after the settlement. She said Carrie had told her it didn't go the way it was supposed to. I told Dana I knew. Dana said she was sorry she hadn't said something sooner, and I believed her. Because some people know something's wrong and talk themselves into thinking it's not their place. I don't hold it against her. She was the one, after all, who picked up the phone when I called. I finished the house renovation alone. It took longer without a second opinion on paint colors, but the work was cleaner for it, every decision exactly what I wanted. Nothing negotiated into something I didn't recognize. My mother had a saying she used on job sites when I was a kid, following me around while my dad worked, measure twice, cut once. She was talking about lumber. But she was also, without knowing it, describing exactly what Carrie forgot to account for, that the man she'd planned everything around had learned patience from a woman who taught him that the most important step happens before you pick up the tool. Carrie measured 18 months. I measured everything else.